All right, hi everybody, and welcome to the Second Century Stewardship Research Fellowship webinar. I see folks are logging on. I'll give just a moment for people to get logged in, and we will begin here. And we'll have a short presentation, and then there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. All right, well, why don't we get started here? Welcome everybody, and I am Nick Fisicelli. I'm with Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park. I will be one of your two speakers for today. Our other speaker is Abe Miller-Rushing with the National Park Service, and we will divvy up the slides. You'll hear from me first, and then from Abe, and then at the end I will have the last few slides. And so if you just some nuts and bolts here, your little GoToMeeting control panel. There is the chat box. It's one of the bottom tabs there within the control panel, and you can write some questions in there at any time. And Abe and I will try to monitor the chat box and try to answer questions that come up from you all, either during the presentation or at the end. Everybody's on a global mute right now, and we'll just keep it that way for the presentation, and we can take you off mute at the end if we're a small enough crowd to have a discussion on any questions that come up. Great. So again, just use the chat box for now with any questions, and we will get going on the presentation. Great. So our outline today, 5 parts. I'll give a quick overview on Second Century Stewardship, which the acronym is SCS. A little bit of nuts and bolts about the fellowships. And then Abe will talk about Acadia National Park, research priorities and what we're looking for in fellows. And then I'll give a little information on how to apply. So SCS, Second Century Stewardship, it began in 2016, which was the centennial of the National Park Service. And so the idea was to look ahead to the next 100 years of stewardship of management of resources in national parks, hence Second Century Stewardship. And its initiative, it's a private/public partnership. So Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park, where I work, we are a nonprofit research and learning organization. We're located within Acadia National Park and really focused on understanding environmental change and adapting to the changing conditions and engaging people in the science. And then the National Park Service is of course, our major partner on this project, and also the National Park Foundation, and support from the David Evans Shaw Family Foundation. And AAAS was also a founding member of Second Century Stewardship. So there are 4 big goals for SCS, and these are to advance conservation and ecosystem science, and really it's about management relevant science. And so stewardship is the term that's used in the National Park Service for management. So stewardship of resources and science that really informs stewardship. And another really big piece is about engaging the public in research and helping them understand the importance of science for parks and for society. And then a big sort of overarching goal is to pursue solutions to critical conservation challenges. And the fellowships are a piece that fits into all of these goals. And so that first one about advancing conservation science, really that is most specifically about the fellowships that we have. And we've been having fellowships at Acadia National Park since 2016. So 2016 was the first year. We've had over the last 4 years, we've had 9 fellows, and we'll have another 1 to 3 for 2020. So this request for proposal is for the 2020 fellowships. And again, these fellowships are about informing park management, communicating science, and really helping contribute to long-term research and understanding of what's happening in parks. And another big piece for Second Century Stewardship is science communication, making sure that the science is reaching many, many different audiences. Certainly managers are a key audience, but park visitors are another key audience, even students of different ages as well, for example. And so there's training that comes with the research fellowships. We have science communication training, a 2 or 3 day training that we lead for the fellows in conjunction with Park Service managers and educators. And so the fellows get support in science communication and utilizing various platforms for their communication, such as social media, interviews with journalists, etc. Education, as mentioned, is another really big piece, and education takes a lot of different forms under Second Century Stewardship, and citizen science is one piece that certainly some fellowships in the past have utilized and done so effectively to engage people in science and to augment and expand the data that can be collected and used in research, and then also linking with other national park education programs in interpretive ranger programs and other offerings, such as with school children. And then the other really big one is this pursuing solutions to critical challenges and having periodic workshops. They could be at big conferences, such as at ESA or AAAS, or here locally at the Acadia Science Symposium, and bringing people together to really chew on some of these critical conservation challenges, for example, big data or genetics and genomics, and trying to figure out how to let's utilize these emerging information and technologies in conservation. So these are the sort of the big parts of SCS, of Second Century Stewardship. And then on next to the nuts and bolts, as we're calling it. And this is specifically for the fellowships, the Second Century Stewardship Fellowships. So who should apply here? You're on the webinar, you should apply. We are encouraging early career scientists. And I want to underline the word encouraged there. We don't have a specific requirement on where you are precisely in your career path, but we encourage early career scientists. You do have to be a U.S. resident and at least 18 years of age. Those are requirements in the U.S. resident. Basically, you have to be in the U.S. working. You don't have to be a citizen in the U.S., but you have to be here working to be a fellow. Basically, we aren't able to help with the visa process. If you are a foreigner living elsewhere and wanted to come over here for the fellowship, we're not able to provide that type of assistance. And then finally, if you're an employee of the Park Service or Schoodic Institute, you are not eligible. So application requirements, these are pretty standard. I think they're pretty standard. They're not very long in any of the parks, which can be a challenge to work on, but that's part of assessment of your communication ability. So title, abstract, communication narrative, project narrative, budget, and justification. So pretty standard components, and please read the RFP for full details on these parts. So there's word limits on the abstract and the communication narrative, and a page limit for the project narrative. Project narrative 3 pages, so it is not a long narrative. So, and again, just check out the RFP for those full details. Funding for this, this maybe is the most important slide, funding, budget. So each fellowship, the total award is $20,000 for a fellowship. That's the maximum budget that we would award, and that can be spent over 1 to 2 years. And there's lots of flexibility in what you sort of include in your budget of up to $20,000, salary, travel, supplies, etc. We recognize that this $20,000 is likely not going to cover an entire research project, all of the pieces that you may be using this for specific parts of work that you'd like to do here in Acadia National Park. And so you can show that in the budget that you're putting together. And then also as part of the fellowship, we can provide housing at Schoodic Institute on our campus, which is within the Schoodic district of Acadia National Park. So we will accept reasonable housing requests and work with you on that. And then there's also communications training that I had mentioned before, a 3-day training. And so you just have to make sure you budget that time for the training. So that's the funding piece. Evaluation criteria, again, some pretty standard pieces here. Intellectual merit, is this research going to advance knowledge within and across disciplines? And then again, the connection to park management and long-term research in parks is really critical. And then finally, we really want to see an interest in science communication. We don't expect that you are already amazing communicators, and you may already be, and that's great, but what we're really looking for is really that interest in science communication. And then there's some weighting that we do of these different parts of on the evaluation. And again, the intellectual merit, of course, is very important. And again, that relevance to long-term stewardship of Acadia. I'll just mention here that the final bullet there, the qualifications of the applicant. We recognize here that people will be at different places in their careers, and thus will have different length CVs, different length publication records, different types of experiences and depths of experiences, and we will take that into account. And so we won't expect a graduate student to have the same number of publications as a postdoc, for example, or a professor, and that's the reason for the lower weighting on that qualifications of the applicant. And then reporting, everybody's favorite part here. Are of course reports. These are not a major list in any way. The annual reports, literally a paragraph is what's needed, and then a final report, and a sharing of all communication products so that we can actually help with distribution of the communication materials that you are producing. And Abe will mention a little bit about the research permit process, which does relate to annual reports as well. Then the schedule here, proposals are due October 30th, so the day before Halloween. They're due at midnight Eastern time, and then there will be a review process in the subsequent months by a panel and ad hoc reviewers, and then we'll make a notification of awards in March of 2020. And the reviewers, they will both be subject matter experts in your field, but also other scientists and resource management professionals. And so we ask you take that into account when writing your proposal, that it'll be understandable by a scientist that's not an expert in your field. All right, and with that, I will pass it over to Abe to talk about Acadia National Park, priorities there, and what we're looking for in fellows.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Nick. And so I'm gonna talk about the kind of Acadia National Park and our landscape and kind of how your research projects can fit in. So first, a nod to the mission of the National Park Service. So our mission is to preserve unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and values of the National Park System for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. The important take home from that for those of you, if any of you have not worked in national parks before, is that we manage both natural and cultural resources and values. And so there's a lot of mix between natural and social science stuff there. And then we also have a part of our mission that's aimed at enjoyment, education, and inspiration. So it's a really interdisciplinary agency, and we think about things and have parts of our mission that are pretty different, but also apply to the kind of interdisciplinarity of the fellowship, and lots of places where you can plug in your research. We in Acadia have one of 18 research learning centers in the National Park Service. We have the largest one, and this is the campus managed by the Schoodic Institute. So we work with the Schoodic Institute to manage this. And these research learning centers are charged explicitly with helping to change the culture of science and education in national parks, and particularly to help move the National Park Service towards a vision where national parks are more like living laboratories, tellers of science narratives, and exemplars of using science to manage resources and enrich experiences. And so this is really that we're trying to improve science and communication in parks and connect it very much with the routine park operations. Also, we're helping to do science to help adapt and respond to a rapidly changing environment. And given that mission, which kind of as written or historically the National Park Service has thought a lot about keeping things the same as they were, say, pre-European settlement, or keeping things static, protecting things as they were at some point in the past. Really now we're shifting our focus to thinking about how do we keep these changing ecosystems and these changing cultural resources healthy over time. And so we're shifting to a focus on ecological and cultural integrity and viability. And we need research to help us do that. And I'll come back to that a little bit more. Acadia is changing really quickly. We have changing, each one of these images kind of could summarize a whole talk unto its own. We have changing plant populations. So we've lost over the 103 years that the park has been in place. We've lost about 1 out of every 6 of the plant species that were here when the park was founded. We've got invasive plants like purple loosestrife, although at this point we've actually successfully pulled most of the invasive plants and are now mostly managing new invasions. And so that would make an interesting thing to plug into research-wise as well. We have emerging diseases like tick-borne diseases like Lyme disease, interesting things, changing dynamics going on with our seabirds. Most of Acadia is islands. There's only one mainland part on the Schoodic Peninsula, and we have a number of seabird breeding populations, and the food web dynamics are changing there. Number of lakes, chemistry, and biological systems in those lake ecosystems are changing, as well as storm surges. The picture of debris. We're more frequently having to clear debris and other things from our coastal systems, and then working with clammers and marine worm harvesters as well. Our intertidal was recently, there was recently legislation that is allowing traditional harvesting of clams and marine worms in the intertidal. So there's a lot of changes going on in the park, and this is just some of them. And so kind of in this environment of change, we're really thinking about whole socio-ecological systems. So trying not to just think about species without thinking about the people too. And we're really trying to take an adaptive management approach, kind of plan, do, learn, and do this iteratively. In the past, we talked about it a lot, but we didn't do it so much. Now we're in an environment where we really have to do it. And we need research to be and your work as fellows to be a part of that process. And we need to engage the community and partners, which is part of the reason why we're really emphasizing communication as a big part of the fellowships as well. We, as a park, have spent some time developing conceptual models with our partners as well, using the open standards for practice of conservation. These conceptual models kind of describe our conservation targets. You don't need to understand the diagram there, but they essentially identify our main conservation targets, the threats, and kind of biophysical factors that influence those conservation targets, things like healthy forests, healthy wetlands, and healthy freshwater systems. And if you're interested, you could have a research project that plugs into that planning process, but also if you're interested in seeing those models, let me know, and we can give you images that you can of these and talk to you about them if it is relevant for your project. Our priority, kind of what came out of this planning process, as our priority management actions are to improve connectivity particularly within stream systems, where culverts and dams and other things are obstructing connectivity. We're controlling invasive species, particularly plants, working to reduce our carbon footprint, assessing and repairing sources of water contamination. Acadia has a lot of interaction with, it's not a block park, it has a lot of small parts and a lot of interaction with surrounding communities. And we're also planning and managing for increased visitation. The park gets about 3.5 million visitors over the past per year over the past couple of years, up from what 10 years ago was 2.5 million visitors a year. We're planning for the protection and retreat of vulnerable natural and cultural resources, which is a new thing for the Park Service, and we're figuring out how to do that well and responsibly, and we're working to engage partners better. And kind of those were relatively specific things, and kind of our big grand challenge questions are here, kind of thinking about how do we understand ecosystem health? How do we define what a healthy forest is as it's changing? How do we encourage better stewardship on the part of visitors, kind of translating communication to actual stewardship action on the part of visitors? And the rest of these are these big challenge questions that I'll let you read, but we would, really encourage fellowships that address any of these questions. Big things we're thinking a lot about. And here I'll move into a little bit more of what we're looking for in how you craft the fellowship proposals. And some of these are emphasizing, reiterating things that Nick mentioned just a little bit ago. One is kind of the goals of the fellowships is to advance science. So we really need a strong science component, and the proposals need to be linked to park management. And we can help with that. And you're welcome to contact us if you're interested as you're preparing your proposal, if you have specific questions. And we also have a strong goal in terms of communicating the science and looking to really encourage studies that look like they could contribute towards long-term research in the future. There's a lot of relevant research topics, and this is just a subset of them. So this is not by any means mean to limit the topics, but rather to show you the breadth of things. So it could range from anywhere from conservation or ecology to economics and education or recreation, or interdisciplinary approaches that touch on several of these. And we've had a number of different disciplines represented in our current fellowships, and you can look at those online. Successful proposals. So these are the characteristics of successful proposals. We're really interested in projects that have a high potential to increase our understanding and help us respond to change in our socio-ecological system in Acadia. We're interested in research that helps us with information needs specific to Acadia, but also that can translate to other locations. And here I'll also mention that the research doesn't need to be limited to Acadia. It can include other park units or surrounding area around Acadia or other field locations. But Acadia just has to be one of the field locations for the work. It needs to be so successful proposals will be cost effective in terms of the scope, and that the funding you're asking for seems like it could actually fund the work you're proposing, and that there's evidence that you are committed to connecting your research with management applications and communicating it broadly. Some great ideas that could work if properly thought out. So this is kind of emphasizing that we allow, a lot of people think that you can't do manipulative things or that you're strongly limited in what you can do in national parks in terms of research, but we're actually more permissive than you would think, or than many people do think. You can do experiments or projects related to restoration or climate adaptation experiments, testing management actions, technology applications. There's a process that you can use things even like drones if it just takes a longer time for the permitting process, but that's all possible. Archaeological and ethnographic research. So there's a lot of things that you can do. That said, there are some things that probably won't work very well. Simulating large-scale disturbances like hurricanes or fires in a national park, probably tough to swing, especially in Acadia, where we don't really do a lot of kind of prescribed fires or things like that. You may be able to do some of those things on private lands around the park, depending upon the specific project. Other things are like shutting down park roads or trails, or things that are dangerous, or things that are not relevant to management. So those are things that probably won't work. Nick mentioned that there are going to be permitting requirements, so all the research projects will require a permit to do research in the national park. And during the review process, as we assess those, we're required to balance the research against any negative impacts to park resources or visitors. Not to say that there can't be any negative impacts, but we just have to balance them or mitigate them as best we can, and that becomes a case-by-case decision. And for projects, there's special permitting requirements for projects that involve manipulations or handling of vertebrates, like animal care and use, or research involving human subjects, or collection of specimens, or anything that may lead to a profit later on down the line. And if you're doing one of those projects and are concerned about the permitting process for that, let me know, and I'd be glad to talk to you about it. Mentors, each fellow gets paired with a mentor, and the role of the mentors are to help really facilitate interactions with park staff and other managers, and that can help with refinements in sampling design that make projects better able to inform directly or with management, or to take advantage of management practices that are going on in the landscape, so that your research can take advantage of those things, kind of natural experiments or things that are happening anyways. And that can happen after your submission after you've been funded as a fellow. And we also, those mentors will also help facilitate revisions to park management plans based on your research. And we'll also plug you into some communication workshops, and we have Schoodic Institute has a communication specialist that leads this work, but there are other communication experts that get brought in, and education experts from both the park side and from outside partners. And you should plan in your proposal to include about 80 hours of work during the fellowship to participate in education and communication related activities, and that should be included in your work plan and budget. And those activities, those communication activities could include work with school groups or teachers or interpretive programs. You don't need to specify what those are going to be, because we'll work with you on that as a part of the communication training and planning as a part of the fellowship. And there will be a education and communication workshop as a part of the fellowship too. The funds for getting you to that workshop and housing you during that workshop do not need to be included in your budget. And you can find information about the 9 fellows that have already been funded as a part of the Second Century Stewardship Project at the scsparkscience.org website. Nick was mentioning that we're interested in funding, and we're trying to be fair in evaluating people at different stages of their careers. And these fellows represent all different stages. So we've had fellows who are PhD students all the way up to professors and faculty at universities, and including postdocs and folks in between stages, and lecturers at universities as well. And I think now I am going to hand it back to Nick to finish us off with how to apply.
All right, thank you, Abe. All right, let's see. Can you see my screen yet?
Nope, can't see it yet. There we are.
Okay, great. All right, how to apply? Yes, critical step. All right. So we have an online application process and a portal for this. So everything is done online, and all the pieces listed in the RFP are in the online application. And the portal is open, scsparkscience.org, and you log in, create your login password, and you can save your application along the midway, so you can go back to it. You don't have to just go onto the site once and submit. You can actually save your work on there and then submit final when you are ready. And so the Second Century Stewardship website is again scsparkscience.org, and you'll see that
I think your screen just disappeared.
Oh, it has? Sorry, thank you. All right. Let me fix that. All right, here we go. Thank you. I think you should be able to see that now. So here's the website, scsparkscience.org, and this is the main page on the website. And then if you go into the Apply tab here that you see, then you can read the full request for proposals here, and then access the application portal and read the application requirements. And this page is also where we'll post a link to the recording of this webinar. So accessing the application portal here, and here's the web page, and you would go in, you would log in. So first time around, you would register, create a login and password, and then you should be good to go. And you should be seeing that. Yeah, so then here's the application, the first page in the application portal there. So title page asking for a project title, the abstract, which is a 250-word abstract, and then the communication narrative as well, just 350 words, and so etc. So all of that is here in this application portal, and it's the same one we used last year. And so last year was the first year, and so I think we got any bugs worked out of it, any kinks. It should work well, but you can reach out if you have any questions about the application portal. And one thing I will just mention it, just to reiterate, emphasize that Acadia National Park is the main place for the research, but the research could be happening, in other sites as well. For example, multi-park research projects are encouraged. So you could be conducting the same work at Acadia and Cape Cod National Seashore and Assateague Island, for just as an example, or some other parks. So certainly it could be research that's happening across more than one park, and we certainly encourage that. We'd love to see those types of projects. And so more information on this page, again, go to scsparkscience.org. There's also the Schoodic Institute website, the Acadia National Park website, and then here's the email address. And it's scsparkscience@schoodicinstitute.org. And why don't I copy that and put it in the chat box for you, and you guys can copy that.
Great.
Okay, you can see that. Yeah, go ahead, Abe.
No, I was just going to say we've got a couple of questions already. The first question I answered in the chat box was, are there land parcels that are off limits due to easements, private ownership, and whatnot? So Acadia has land that is owned by the National Park Service kind of in fee, and so we own and manage directly. And there may be some areas of even that may be inappropriate for some types of research, but we would have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. We also manage some easements on private property, and so some of those easements allow research, and at least some types of research on those properties. Some of them don't. And so again, that would have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And then there are a number of land trusts and other private landowners in the surrounding area that may be interested and actually be even excited about having research on their properties. So there can be opportunities for doing research on the landscape around, but it would just depend on the individual project.
Yeah, I think one other example that I thought of, Abe, would be, there are seabird nesting colonies on islands and bald eagle nests on some islands, and so access to those islands is restricted during the nesting period. So typically that's June to August. But for example, September now, there's some islands that now are open to access by researchers, and so there may just be a specific timing for when you can access some areas. Peregrine falcon nesting is another example where there could be some restrictions on certain areas.
Yeah, yep, exactly. Yep. And we can make exception for those, particularly when you're actually studying the seabirds during the breeding season or peregrines during the breeding season. But again, that'll have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Bonnie, if you have a specific question, you can either ask it in the chat about a specific thing that you were wondering about. You can either ask it in the chat or follow up with us afterwards. And then we have a question from Jessica about interest in replication research. I guess I would ask for a clarification there if you're meaning to repeat a study that's already been done in the park, Let's see if we can unmute that. Jessica, I think I just unmuted you. So if you wanted to clarify that, are you interested in if asking if we're interested in you repeating research that's been done before?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so either research that's been done in Acadia specifically, or research that has occurred potentially in other parks that might be able to inform management in Acadia. But, I was sort of thinking along the lines of, testing to see if things are remaining the same or if they're different based on the human perception, because I'm coming from the social science side of things. So I know that things are changing ecologically, right? We know that, and probably sociologically as well. But we're, kind of an interest in how that's affecting that visitor experience. And I know that there have been previous studies at Acadia about visitor experience and perceptions. And so just sort of track those changes is just one idea that popped into my mind. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on sort of if you would be in support of something like that, replicating studies that have happened either at Acadia or other parks that might have some similar management challenges.
Yeah, I'll let Nick weigh in too, but I'd say that yes, that kind of replication research would be of interest, kind of in part because I think it would be good to get a variation across park units depending upon how you're evaluating the replication, but either across park units or protected areas or change over time. I think I could certainly imagine certain replication research designs being, and the kinds of questions you might ask being of interest for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Nick, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say definitely. I think that could be an interesting line to pursue. So are, for example, Acadia visitors, do they have different perceptions than visitors at other parks? Something along those lines. I think there certainly could be something that could be of interest.
All right.
Abe, there's another question from Susan about reference to specific areas in the park for a project, and do the proposals need to identify the really specific areas for doing the research, or is that something that they can identify with managers at a later time?
It's possible. Actually, I think we've even of the existing fellows, I think there's been different levels of specificity. Like some fellows have proposed, like, I want to core this lake or pond specifically, or others have said that I want to evaluate, small mammals broadly, but then they end up having to focus on a particular area, but didn't specify it. So I think it can vary. What a problem that we've had some proposals run into in the past is that they propose to study species that are just not common enough in the park to warrant study in the park. And so you would just want to make sure that that whatever species or unit you're studying is common enough in the park. But we could definitely work with you on locations that make sense, after the fellowship. So you don't need to specify that, get too specific in the proposal. Would you agree with that, Nick?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. I think it's varied among the projects, but yeah, making sure that the species that your study species is really one that lives in Acadia and is sufficiently abundant enough to warrant the research is definitely critical.
And I got another question directed just to came just to me, but I think it's for everybody, or for both of us. But the question is sample analysis an expense that can be included in the budget? And yes, for sure. If you're going to be collecting biological material or physical material, water samples, vegetation samples, or air, or geological stuff. That can, the analysis of those samples can definitely be included in the budget. If you're doing modeling, computer time can be included in the, or big computational stuff, that kind of stuff can be included in the budget as well. You can include field assistance in the budget. So, and I should mention also, we recognize that $20,000 isn't enough to fully fund most research projects. So, budgets sometimes, so we recognize that oftentimes these fellowships will be combined with other funding sources. And so sometimes budgets come in kind of funny. So they're like, I just need $20,000 to hire a field assistant or to fund travel or something, whereas there's another source of funding that's funding a lot of the rest of the work. If you just let us know that in the budget justification, that'll help us interpret how realistic it is that the funding will be able to support your project. We definitely recognize that's going to be the case for a lot of folks.
Great. I see Susan had a follow-up question. Susan, I just unmuted you if you want to give your follow-up question.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so my follow-up question is just related to, I am also coming from the social science perspective, and so I study human use in parks, and so just thinking about within a research proposal, if we're proposing to study like a particular phenomena, or if we say, we're looking at this type of use that likely occurs in Acadia, kind of being able to work with managers to further narrow that down after the fellowship is awarded is kind of the main, my main question, because I think it would be difficult to really say with certainty, we definitely want to, or I, proposing like, I definitely want to study this at this location in Acadia, when really like that location might not be the best manifestation of what I'm interested in. So I think just kind of clarifying that in the context of like human use or visitor use of Acadia rather than like a species, a plant or animal species, I think is the type of clarification that would be helpful.
Yeah, so you're just asking if we can, I mean, even for social science research, I think that we can help find the best location to do particular studies, for sure. And you can ask us that before you apply, or we will certainly help do that after for all the fellows to help optimize the study design, because unless you've been working here for a number of years, you wouldn't necessarily know exactly where the best places to cite everything are.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right. If anybody else has a question, you can type it into the chat box. And if a brilliant question comes up after you're off the webinar, you can reach out to the SCS Park Science at schoodicinstitute.org email address, and we will get you answers to questions that you may have. And do reach out with questions. We're happy to provide information to help to help you as you work through your proposals. All right, I don't see anything else coming in right now. So thanks everybody for attending, and we will get this webinar posted, a recording posted in the next couple of days. And with that, again, thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon, and please do follow up with any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing the proposals.